10 years after the tragic deaths of Hamlet, the royal family, and several court officials, the members of Delusions of Grandeur Theatre traveled to Denmark and conducted interviews with survivors and local members of the community. This piece is edited from those interviews, as well as journal entries from members of the company and other found texts.
When Mark told me that the 10-year anniversary of the Hamlet massacres was coming up and he wanted to go to Denmark and interview the people, I was a little anxious. I mean, there is so much blood and death there, and I didn't know that the locals would want us outsiders coming in and poking around their business.
When we arrived in Denmark, we began seeking out interviewees. To my shock, the first person to respond to our flyers was none other than the lady Ophelia herself. So, the first question that I have for you, and thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me.
It's okay. I thought that people needed to hear what has happened since those tragic days.
I think so as well, and that's part of why we're doing this. So, but the first question I have, and probably the most important question that I'm sure everyone's been wondering is, how did you survive? I was pretty sure that you died in the course of the events.
Yes, I was distraught at seeing my dead brother lying there, and I attempted to take my own life, but I guess it was a stroke of the divine, but I missed.
Oh.
And I grazed my left breast, but I didn't penetrate my rib cage. So while there was superficial damage, and I did pass out, so a lot of people thought I had died.
That makes sense.
I was able to be treated, and I made a full.
So looking back on the events 10 years ago, do you look at that and look at the things you did or didn't do, and maybe see something you did or like I said didn't do that contributed maybe to how things ended up?
There have been rumors going around that I had something to do with my brother's death and King Claudius's and Prince Hamlet's, and I think that that's where your line of questioning is coming from, because of course you're interviewing me, you're going to want to ask about those rumors, but that's all they are, rumors.
So are you saying then that this entire series of events kind of took you completely by surprise?
Yes.
After our initial talk with Ophelia, we decided to seek out a few of the guards who had been on duty during the time of the event. What we learned from those guards was shocking.
Well, it was my day off, but later they called us all in, but that was after the fact.
Yes, that was much after the fact. As I recall, it took a good 2 to 3 weeks for it all to finally kind of come together, you know. The smell of Polonius's body in the castle.
I'd forgotten about them. The two that were in the castle. Who you said it was Polonius? Who was also? In all honesty, it took them days to find Polonius's body. At this point, I didn't even know. I mean,
you'd think us being the royal guard that
we should have known that.
That we might have checked, but honestly, our jobs in particular,
we stand by the door.
After having spoken to people close to the issue, we slowly turned towards those less involved. Some of these included a university puppet professor as well as a student of the university.
Okay. 10 years have passed since the Hamlet massacres, and I was wondering, is the university going to do anything to commemorate the passage of time?
Well, there are some events that take place from the university. Yes, I quite say some events, mostly organized by student organizations. Yes, quite so, student organizations.
So tell me, what do you remember about the Hamlet massacres?
I'm not really sure. Is that the one about the guy who he was in like a bad drug deal or something and he got beat down? And there was something about like homosexuals, or is that what you're talking about?
No, Hamlet, your prince. King Claudius, the noble Laertes, they were found dead about 10 years ago today.
You know, man, I can I could barely remember 10 minutes ago.
So how long have you been attending Denmark University?
You know, man, there you go with, like, another one of those time questions. I think, like, you're really hung up on it. And I just think, like, you know, like, the world and, like, the stuff we do, man, it's all, in the end, man, it's all kind of timeless, isn't it, you know?
No.
Well, I'd have to say that it hasn't really changed much for me personally. You know, I stood by the door then. I stand by the door now, and honestly, I'm almost at that point of being done standing by the door. I'm almost through.
It is different now because there's a different guy that walks through the door now all the time.
During my visit, I took a stroll through the graveyard, and upon that stroll, I stumbled upon an unlikely interviewee. Now, Hamlet Senior, I'm very impressed that you've managed to manifest here today, and I can't tell you how much I really do appreciate that. So,
Well, I am in limbo after all. I don't have much else going on.
oh, well, I hopefully maybe this will help you move past your limbo, as it were. So, I want to ask for you, being in limbo, how's the past 10 years been?
Past 10 years, next 10 years. It's really all the same in limbo.
Do you experience time very, very differently than when you were on Earth, or?
You know, actually, once I died, I realized that the world really is timeless.
You know, how do you think the community has handled the massacre and all of the events that have unfolded since, you know, over the past 10 years?
Well, I think they're taking it pretty hard, but you'll have to excuse me because I spend most of my time out by the graveyard, and most people who come my way are rather distraught. Well, as I've mentioned before, that there are rumors abound, like everybody seems to have their version of what happened, and some of it's based on loose evidence, some of it's based purely on fabrication, but there's really no way to know exactly what happened.
So over the past 10 years, things have changed a lot, and nowadays people don't really know as much about what took place.
I do. Ophelia did it.
Oh. After my interview with Hamlet Sr., I decided to expand my graveyard interviews. Unfortunately, not every dead person was quite as talkative. So, Horatio, there were a lot of people who said, you know, when you vanished rather unexpectedly 10 years ago in the midst of all of the activity, that perhaps somehow you were, that you'd survived or that you were maybe even behind it. Could you elaborate on the tragic circumstances of your unfortunate and untimely death? After what I learned in the graveyard, the company knew that we would have to revisit with several of the people we had already interviewed and bring to them this new information.
There are rumors abound about who was behind these deaths, and we've recently interviewed somebody who is adamant that it was Ophelia who's behind the deaths and that she's still at large. What do you think of that?
Ophelia's still alive?
I try and keep the younger generation aware of what's been going on, and that this is still unresolved. And do you know who your king now is?
Not really, but
Yes, we do need to move on, but there's a difference between moving on and forgetting. We can't forget this.
as we look back over our time here, it seems obvious that the people of Denmark are still feeling the effects of the massacre from 10 years ago. They all are dealing with this in a different way, and I'm left wondering if they will ever recover from this. One need only to look at them, and how they dramatically turn away, to see the effects of the tragedy of the Prince of Denmark. Yeah,
How you doing?
doing pretty good.
So, Hamlet,
So Hamlet,
10 years later.
10 years later.
Are you sure you got those numbers right?
Best research we could cobble together.
Because I don't think it's been... I think it's been more than 10 years, Mark.
I don't... Well, Nicole,
No, Mark, I'm serious. It's been Read your fucking history, dude.